We saw that calculating standard deviation for just 9 data values was a pretty intense calculation. It took multiple steps, and we really needed to keep ourselves organized as we did it. So you can imagine if you were needing to do this frequently or for larger data sets, that having a way to do it with technology would be really useful. And that's what we're going to look at next, is how to use something called Geogebra, which is a free online program, to actually calculate standard deviation. Now, you can calculate standard deviation using spreadsheets like Google Sheets or Excel, but what's nice about using Geogebra is that Geogebra has a button that allows you to calculate not just standard deviation, but many other common statistics we might need for a data set. If you look below, I actually have a screenshot of what you can bring up with a couple of clicks in GeoGebra. And this screenshot shows that you get the sample mean, you get the sample standard deviation, you also get the 5-number summary, which includes the median, all at once with a couple of clicks. So it's kind of useful to know how to do GeoGebra because immediately you could get a bunch of things instead of just the standard deviation. On this slide, I actually have instructions of how to get into GeoGebra and then how to get the summary statistics to come up. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and demo it for you. This slide is just kind of reference for you to get back into that. To find the standard deviation with GeoGebra, we first have to get to GeoGebra. One way is you can use the website address that I gave on the previous slide. You would need to type in that whole thing to get into the spreadsheet part of GeoGebra. If you do that, you'll get this set up in your browser. And this, notice, has a spreadsheet, which we've seen for doing other things with like Google Sheets, a place for you to enter in data values. So that's your spreadsheet format. Now, if you forget that exact website, what you can also do is just go to any browser, type in GeoGebra, and in your search, you will actually now have the general GeoGebra website and then some other options, sub-options. And what we want to choose is GeoGebra Classic, which are various things bundled, including the spreadsheet. So we would click on GeoGebra Classic. When you first get into GeoGebra Classic, it will bring up some options on the left-hand side. And there's the spreadsheet option, and you could click immediately on the spreadsheet option. Now, if you accidentally click somewhere else before you click on spreadsheet, those options disappear. How you can get back to them is you go up to the upper right-hand side of the screen where you see these 3 horizontal bars and click on those bars, and that gives you a drop-down menu. And if you go to perspectives, this will give you the option of going into a graphing utility or the geometry or the spreadsheet option. So we're going to go to the spreadsheet option. And now this puts us in the same location that we would have gotten to if I'd used that direct link before, spreadsheet option. So what we're going to do once we are in the spreadsheet option is actually enter the data that we want to find the standard deviation for, enter one of the columns in the spreadsheet. I'm going to use column A. So the data we had from earlier where we calculated the standard deviation by hand, where it was for company A, phone holds. And so we had 24, 2 25s, a 26, a 27, another 27, a 28, a 29, and a 30. So these were the 9 data points we had. It's always important as you're entering things like this in, make sure you haven't made a mistake before you go any further. Double check that you've typed those in correctly. Next, to find the standard deviation, or indeed any of the summary stats for this, we need to tell GeoGebra we want to use all of these data points. The way to do that is to highlight these. The quickest way to highlight in GeoGebra is to go to the top of the column where you've entered the data, where it says A, and click on A, and that will automatically highlight the entire column, which is where the data is. So the column is highlighted. Next, we're going to click on the little histogram button that you see right above A in the upper right-hand side of the screen. We're going to click that histogram button. When you click it, you get 3 options: 1 variable analysis, 2 variable analysis, and multivariable analysis. We have a single variable. We want to use 1 variable analysis. So we'll click that. And what pulls up initially is a histogram. So GeoGebra does a nice job of giving us histograms. And we could, if we were interested in histogram, take a look at that. You could even change the size of the bin on the histograms to make it wider or smaller. But we're not really interested in histogram here. But I'm going to mention that if you click on the pull-down menu where the histogram name is, you actually will see that you can also do a box plot with GeoGebra. So GeoGebra will immediately do a box plot of this data for you. But again, we're not interested in the box plot now, but if you ever wanted to do a box plot with technology, you could use GeoGebra. What we want are those summary statistics. Now to find those, go all the way over here to the right, and on the right side, you'll see a button that is a capital sigma X. It looks kind of like an E with a dent in it, capital E, but it's actually a sigma, the Greek letter sigma X. And if I hover over it, it says show statistics. That's what we want to click on this button. And as soon as I click on it, what we will have are these another window that opens up that shows the statistics for this data set. They're labeled with abbreviations. N stands for the number of data values there were 9. Mean is, of course, the mean, and that is the mean we calculated earlier, 26.777, or if we round to 26.8. And then we have the next two numbers both relate to the standard deviation, but the one that we would want to use for sample standard deviation would be S. S for standard deviation, 1.98. If you take a stats class, you'll also learn about what that other one above it that's abbreviated with a lowercase sigma relates to. But for our class, S is the sample standard deviation, the one we want to grab. And then we have two values next that represent some interesting things about the data, but that we don't use them in this class. Sigma X is the sum of all the data values. You may recognize 241. Sigma X squared is the sum of all the squared values of the data set. So we don't necessarily need to report those out, but the last 5 entries here, the min, Q1, the median, Q3, and the max, that is the 5-number summary. So you get all of this information fairly quickly with just a few presses of the button. So as we just saw, GeoGebra will very quickly give you the summary statistics for any data set, and it's free. It's something you can easily access online. So again, the key things that you're probably going to want to get from GeoGebra would be the mean, the standard deviation, which is labeled as S, and then the 5-number summary here, min, Q1, median, Q3, and the max. There are a couple of things that we've talked about in this chapter that don't come up here, but you could easily get really quickly. Notice it doesn't give you the range, but remember the range can be calculated very quickly by just subtracting the max and the min. The other thing it doesn't give you is the interquartile range, but again, that could be easily calculated by doing Q3 minus Q1. So it gives, what GeoGebra is giving you is all the basic things that maybe take a little bit longer to calculate. The mean, the standard deviation, and the 5-number summary. And you can get these other two that are pretty commonly used very quickly with a couple of subtractions from the information that is given. So on your homework, one thing I do want to emphasize is pay attention to whether the problem is saying to do it by hand, which would mean often filling in a table to find the standard deviation, or if they don't say, in which case you could use technology to find the standard deviation. And feel free on homework problems that don't specifically say to show all your work to use technology to actually find the standard deviation. So use GeoGebra if you want, because I think that's how most people would, because of how calculation intensive the standard deviation is. But I do have you doing the standard deviation a couple of times by hand, once in the worksheet and at least once in your MyOpen Math assignments, just so that you get used to what it actually is giving you, that it's the average distance from each data point to the mean. On the exam, you will not have to calculate a standard deviation by hand, but there will be questions about the understanding of the standard deviation, how the standard deviation changes depending on how the spread of the data set changes. So, but be reassured, I only make you do the standard deviation by hand in homework.